Level 1. Lost in the endless sand. The adventure began with excitement. You had always dreamed of exploring the world's deadliest desert. Maps, supplies, water, everything seemed perfectly planned. The morning sun painted the golden dunes with beautiful colors. The desert looked peaceful, almost magical. You smiled. This is going to be unforgettable. For the first few hours, everything went exactly as expected. You walked across the soft sand. You admired the endless horizon. You took photos. You enjoyed the silence. But the desert had a secret. Slowly, the wind became stronger. Tiny grains of sand drifted through the air. The sky started to change. You checked your map. Something wasn't right. The landmarks you had seen before were gone. Every sand dune looked exactly the same. You turned around. Nothing looked familiar anymore. You tried walking back, but every direction looked identical. The sun climbed higher. The heat became unbearable. Sweat rolled down your face. Your footsteps disappeared behind you. The wind erased every trace. You stopped, looked around. Nothing. Only endless sand. Your heart started beating faster. You reached for your phone. No signal. You checked your GPS. The battery was almost dead. Panic slowly replaced confidence. You climbed the highest dune nearby. Maybe you could see a road, a village, anything. But from the top, there was only more desert. Thousands of golden dunes stretching beyond the horizon. No buildings, no vehicles, no people. Only silence. The sun began to set. The temperature dropped quickly. The beautiful desert suddenly felt dangerous. You realized something terrifying. You weren't exploring the desert anymore. You were lost inside it. As darkness covered the sky, millions of stars appeared overhead. It was one of the most beautiful nights you had ever seen. But beauty couldn't hide reality. You were completely alone. You opened your backpack, counted your water. It wasn't enough, not even close. You whispered to yourself, "Tomorrow, I have to find a way out." You closed your eyes, listening only to the wind, hoping. Morning would bring hope. Instead, it would bring the desert's first real challenge. The first light of morning woke you. The cold desert night was gone within minutes. The heat returned. The sun climbed higher. Every step became harder. You reached for your water bottle. Only a few drops remained. You took one small sip, then closed the bottle. You didn't know when you would find water again. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction. Golden dunes, dry rocks, nothing else, no trees, no rivers, no signs of life. The silence became overwhelming. Hours passed. Your lips became dry. Your throat burned with every breath. The heavy backpack felt twice as heavy now. The sun showed no mercy. Hot air shimmered above the sand. Even breathing felt difficult. You kept walking. One step, then another. You told yourself, "Don't stop." Because stopping meant losing hope. In the distance, you thought you saw something. A group of green trees, maybe a small pond. Your heart raced. You walked faster, then faster. But as you got closer, everything disappeared. It was only hot air bending the light. A mirage. The desert had fooled you. Disappointment hit harder than the heat. You sat on the sand, closed your eyes. Your energy was fading. You looked inside your backpack. There was almost nothing left. One small snack. An empty bottle. A family photograph. You held the photograph tightly. It reminded you why you had to keep going. As the afternoon continued, the wind returned. Small waves of sand moved across the ground. The sky slowly turned orange. The temperature finally began to fall. You climbed another tall dune. At the top, you stopped, far away. You noticed something different. Not water, not trees, a strange shape on the horizon. Maybe rocks, maybe an old structure. You couldn't tell. But it was the first thing that didn't look like endless sand. For the first time all day, you felt a tiny spark of hope. As night covered the desert once again, you whispered, "Tomorrow, I'll reach it." You lay beneath the stars, hungry, thirsty, exhausted, but still alive. And sometimes, surviving one more day is the greatest victory of all. Level 3, the sandstorm. The sun had barely risen, but something felt wrong. The air was unusually still. Not a single sound. No birds, no wind, only silence. You looked toward the horizon. A strange brown cloud was growing larger. At first, you thought it was a mountain, but it kept moving, faster, closer. Your heart started pounding. Then you realized the truth. It wasn't a mountain. It was a giant sandstorm. The wind hit you like a wall. Fine sand blasted against your face. You could barely keep your eyes open. Within seconds, the blue sky disappeared. Everything turned orange. The world vanished behind flying sand. You wrapped a scarf around your face, pulled your hood tight, held your backpack close. Then you kept moving, step by step, but every direction looked the same. The wind erased every footprint. The storm became stronger. You couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. The sand pushed against your body. Breathing became difficult. You stumbled, fell to your knees. For a moment, you thought it was over. But then, you remembered why you started this journey. You stood up again, fighting the storm with every step. Minutes felt like hours. The roaring wind never stopped. Your legs grew weaker. Your eyes burned. Your throat was completely dry. Then, through the swirling sand, you noticed something. A dark shape. A massive rock. You rushed toward it. The giant rock blocked most of the wind. You crouched behind it. The storm continued to rage around you. Sand covered your backpack, your clothes, even your boots. You waited, patiently, slowly. The wind became weaker. The orange sky faded. Sunlight broke through the clouds of dust. The desert became visible once again. You stood up, shook the sand from your jacket, looked around. The landscape had completely changed. The dunes were different. The old path had disappeared forever. But one thing remained. Your determination. You adjusted your backpack, took a deep breath, and walked forward once again, because surviving the storm meant you were stronger than yesterday. But the desert still had many secrets waiting. Level 4, deadly creatures. The desert was quiet again. Too quiet. After surviving the sandstorm, you believed the worst was over. You were wrong. The morning sun slowly warmed the endless sand. Every step felt heavier than yesterday. Your body was exhausted, but you couldn't stop. You walked carefully across a field of rocks. The sand here looked different. Harder. Darker. Suddenly, you heard a sound. Hiss. You froze. Only a few feet away. A large desert snake was coiled beneath a rock. Its eyes never left you. You slowly stepped backward. One careless move could be your last. The snake lifted its head. Then, it disappeared into the sand. You let out a deep breath, but the danger wasn't over. As the afternoon heat grew stronger, you searched for shade beneath a rocky cliff. You placed your backpack on the ground. Just as you reached down, a large scorpion crawled across the sand. Its tail was raised. Ready to defend itself, you quickly moved away. The desert reminded you once again. Everything here was built to survive, even if it meant danger for you. As the sun began to set, you continued walking through a narrow canyon. The silence returned. Then, you noticed fresh animal tracks in the sand. Large tracks, too large to belong to a fox. Your heart raced. You looked around. Nothing. Only towering rocks. Then, a distant growl echoed through the canyon. You couldn't see what made the sound, but you knew one thing. You couldn't stay there. You hurried forward. The canyon finally opened into a wide desert plain. The sky turned orange. The dangerous sounds faded behind you. You stopped for a moment. Looked back. The desert had tested your courage once again. Not with heat. Not with wind. But with fear. You realized surviving wasn't about being fearless. It was about staying calm. Even when every instinct told you to run, you smiled. Because today, you survived another challenge. But tomorrow, the desert would become even hotter. Level 5, the hottest day. The sun had not even reached its highest point. Yet, the heat was already unbearable. The air itself felt like fire. Every breath burned your lungs. The sand beneath your boots became so hot. It felt like walking across burning metal. You wrapped your jacket around your head, but it made little difference. There was no escape, no shade, no clouds, only an endless sky. You checked your water bottle, empty. Not a single drop remained. You closed your eyes. For a moment, you imagined the sound of rain, cool rivers, green forests. But when you opened your eyes, there was only the endless desert. Hours passed. Your legs became weaker. Your vision blurred. The sunlight shimmered across the dunes. Everything seemed to move. You could barely think. Your heartbeat echoed inside your ears. You stumbled forward, one slow step at a time. Then, you saw something unbelievable. Far ahead, a small rocky hill, unlike the endless sand around it. You gathered your remaining strength. Every step felt impossible. The heat grew even stronger. The wind carried burning sand across your face. You almost collapsed, but you refused to stop. Finally, you reached the rocks. Behind one giant boulder, there was shade. Only a small patch, but it felt like another world. You sat down. Your hands were shaking. Your clothes were covered in sand. Your face was sunburned. You looked toward the sky. The blazing sun still ruled the desert. But you had survived its hottest day. As evening arrived, the air slowly became cooler. A gentle breeze returned. You stood up again. Your body was exhausted, but your spirit was stronger than ever. You smiled quietly, because every challenge had taught you something. Strength wasn't about never falling. It was about standing up, again and again. You adjusted your backpack, looked toward the endless horizon, and continued your journey. But the desert still had one final illusion waiting for you. Level 6, the mirage. The desert looked peaceful, but appearances can be dangerous. You had survived the burning heat. You had survived the deadly creatures. Now, the desert was ready to attack your mind. The morning began quietly. A cool breeze brushed across the dunes. For the first time in days, walking felt easier. Then, you saw it, far across the horizon. A beautiful blue lake, crystal clear water, tall palm trees, green grass waving in the wind. Your heart raced. This has to be real. You walked faster, then faster. Soon, you were running. Every step filled you with hope. You could almost hear the water. You could almost feel its cool touch. But something was wrong. No matter how far you walked, the lake never became closer. It stayed exactly the same distance away. Your breathing became heavy. Your legs began to shake. Still, you refused to stop. Finally, you reached the place where the lake should have been. There was nothing, only hot sand, dry rocks, and endless silence. It was another mirage. The desert had tricked you again. You fell to your knees. For a moment, you wanted to give up. You looked toward the sky. The sun was beginning to fall. Then, a soft breeze blew across the desert. It carried something unusual, not the sound of wind, a faint ringing. You stood up slowly. Far away, on a rocky hill, you noticed an old stone tower. Unlike the mirage, it didn't disappear. You rubbed your eyes. It was still there. You watched it for several minutes. The tower remained. Hope returned. You adjusted your backpack, took one deep breath, and started walking again. Step by step, not toward an illusion, but toward something real. As the sun disappeared behind the dunes, the ancient tower stood quietly against the orange sky, waiting. Perhaps it held the answer, or perhaps another challenge. Only tomorrow would reveal the truth. Level 7, the last hope. The ancient stone tower stood silently beneath the morning sky. For days, it had been your only destination. Now, you were finally standing in front of it. Its walls were old, cracked by centuries of heat and sand. You slowly stepped inside. The air was cooler. Dust covered the floor. Broken stone stairs led upward. You climbed carefully, step by step. At the top, you looked across the endless desert. For a moment, you saw nothing. Then, far away, a thin line of smoke rose into the sky. Your heart skipped a beat. Smoke meant one thing: people. It was the first real sign of civilization you had seen since getting lost. Without wasting another second, you climbed down and headed toward it. The journey was still long. Your legs were weak. Your water was gone. Every step felt heavier than the last. The sun slowly climbed higher. Hours passed. The smoke seemed closer. Then, the ground beneath your feet suddenly collapsed. You slid into a shallow pit hidden beneath the sand. The fall wasn't deep, but climbing out was difficult. The loose sand kept sliding back. You tried once, twice, 3 times. Finally, using your backpack as support, you pulled yourself out, covered in sand, breathing heavily, but still alive. You looked toward the smoke again. It was still there. You smiled. Nothing would stop you now. As evening arrived, the smoke became clearer. Then, you saw something else. Small tents, a few parked vehicles, people moving around, a desert rescue camp. Your vision blurred. You wanted to run, but your body had no strength left. You took one final step, then another. A rescue worker noticed you. He shouted to the others. They rushed toward you with water and supplies. Someone caught you before you collapsed. For the first time in many days, you felt safe as you looked back. The endless desert glowed beneath the setting sun. It had tested your strength, your courage, and your hope. You had survived. But one final chapter still remained. Level 8, a new beginning. The first thing you felt was cool water. For a moment, you thought you were dreaming. Slowly, you opened your eyes. A white tent stood above you. Sunlight filtered through the fabric. You heard calm voices outside. The nightmare was over. A rescue worker smiled. You made it. You looked around. A bottle of water, medical supplies, clean clothes. Everything felt unreal. Only yesterday, you had been fighting for every breath. Now, you were finally safe. After resting for several hours, you stepped outside the tent. The rescue camp was alive. People were preparing vehicles. Helicopters rested nearby. Some survivors were talking quietly. Others were resting, just like you. You walked to the edge of the camp. far away. The endless desert stretched to the horizon. It looked beautiful, peaceful, almost innocent. But you knew the truth. Behind that beauty, it hid unbearable heat, deadly creatures, violent sandstorms, crushing loneliness, and endless illusions. You placed your backpack on the ground. It was old, covered with dust. The same backpack that had stayed with you from the very first step. Inside, you found the family photograph. It was slightly worn, but still intact. You smiled. That picture had given you strength. When everything else was gone, one of the rescue workers walked over. He asked quietly, "What kept you going?" You looked back at the desert, then answered, "Hope." Because hope weighs nothing, but it can carry a person across impossible distances. The next morning, a rescue vehicle carried you away from the desert. As the dunes disappeared behind you, you realized something. The greatest victory wasn't escaping the desert. It was refusing to give up. Even when the desert wanted you to. Every step, every mistake, every painful moment had changed you forever. You weren't the same person who entered the desert. You had become stronger, braver, wiser. Sometimes life feels like an endless desert. The road is hard. The future is uncertain. And giving up seems easier. But if you keep moving, one step at a time, you'll eventually find your way. The desert didn't defeat you. It revealed the strength that was always inside you. As the sun slowly set behind the golden dunes, you smiled one last time. Not because the journey was easy, but because you survived.